This is not a scientific headline. It's not a scientific statement. It's a highly emotional and unscientific statement on a very urgent issue that must be treated with the highest available standard of scientific checking and verification. This is all emotional kind of bandwagon. And there is a picture of Starma. And there is a kind of figure that is not at all true. It's still underrated, but it's being kind of treated as special because they're saying it's 50,000. And the BBC is saying that there will be no TV license kind of excuses for people not to pay. And this is about the COVID-19. And on the pages 10 and 11, apparently a brother, sibling of the Yorkshire Ripper has been found, and he's given them an exclusive about his brother's crimes, and he still doesn't understand it. And there is an Arabic name, Khairi Saadallah, who is pictured as the knife man facing life for terror murder of 3 pals in the park. And he says that it wasn't a terror murder. What difference does it make to the victims and to the relatives and loved ones and families, and if they've had children, they've got children. There is a piece about Priti Patel, the investigation into her bullying of the staff at the Home Office and other kind of ministries she has been imposed in, is being suppressed by Boris Johnson, and it's been delayed by 8 months. And there is a Mirror investigation, which is long overdue, which says rape, drugs, missing children, the hell of private kids' homes, vulnerable suffer in chaotic system as farms rake in council cash. Remember what we say about the councils? We say that councils are corrupt, and councils are the largest number or the creators and causers of the largest number or numbers of crimes in this country. And there is this piece about the mystery of the letter to the police about the missing person, named here as Stephen. Now, all of these stories are kind of representative and reflect the dysfunction at every stage in this country, in Britain. And there is a piece on page 27 where ballet teacher got cancer from dance floor asbestos. Now, there was no checking, was there? And that is typical of the lack of rigor and lack of investigation into health and safety in this country. And there is a piece on the pages 30 and 31 saying that investment offers which don't add up. So if we take the Mirror today, including this one, it's dodgy because it's an emotional statement, not a scientific one, not based on any scientific evidence. And all of this is the dodgy one, and the rest of the stories are about the various aspects of dysfunction in the agencies and the kind of government, including the fact that they're suppressing, and they have suppressed for 8 months the so-called investigation inquiry into the bullying that Priti Patel has been accused of doing to the staff in government departments where she has been a minister. And the Guardian admits that the government is admitting that millions may miss out on most effective vaccine, and the number of casualties they're admitting has reached 50,000. Of course, by now it is more than 50,000 because it's a few days kind of lag between the actual date, last date counted, and the date of the release of the information. Now, as we have been noticing, Tariq Ali was spied on by police for 35 years. Now, that is an absolutely staggeringly unbelievable news story. Because most people who are doing political campaigns are spied on and have been spied on and have been targeted for all kinds of sabotage work to undermine their work and their kind of campaigning. And for Tariq Ali to say that he, on the page 11, let's say it's not page 11, that he says that it's incredible that after 35 years, special branch were still engaging in the same anti-democratic activity. And it says that at least 14 police persons spied on Tariq Ali over 35 years. And there is a picture taken from the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign. It must be a rally somewhere in central London, maybe near Oxford Street or in Oxford Street, where Tariq Ali is pictured standing kind of in a mood, in a kind of resigned state physically, next to Vanessa Redgrave. Now, Vanessa Redgrave is, of course, of the separate kind of left-wing party than the international Marxist group that Tariq Ali kind of joined. And there is a piece on The page is called The Guardian, Life and Arts, and it's there on page 4 that says under life, Black lives, contesting racism is not un-American. Now, the fact that this has to be even explained shows the hold racism has on American kind of society. Same case in the UK. Any campaign or campaigner against racism is considered doing something somehow not quite normal. Of course, they are. And 35 years of spying on Tariq Ali is a reminder of just how kind of extra sensitive the parts of the UK state have been and are about certain things that don't really not only not threaten society, but also are in fact positive things that society is enriched by. Campaigners enrich societies. Essentially, campaigners, with the exception of the kind of racists and right-wing and supremacists and whatever, ordinarily campaigners enrich societies and the quality and the standard and the factor of democracy, accountability, and all the rest of it. In fact, society entails and kind of society warrants the existence and the process of ongoing campaigns at every level, every stage. There must be campaigners and there must be campaigns. It is remarkable that the piece in The Guardian about Tariq Ali being spied on for 35 years doesn't give a contextual account of all the things that he was kind of being spied on, suspicion of doing. And it will appear that anything they kind of may log about any of the targets of spying would be found to have been very, very innocent. I mean, except this still dodgy area of terrorism and extremist kind of violence, which is a new thing in Britain, comparatively new thing, in fact. Most campaigners are doing kind of very good things for society. Here is a piece by Afua Harsh on The Guardian, page 4 of the opinion. What is this Guardian? What section is this one? And it's the journal, the Guardian journal. It calls itself journal. And the editorial says, inequality kills. It's about COVID-19, as Boris Johnson knows. So what is he going to do about it? Now, Boris Johnson has not admitted ever that inequality kills. If anything, inequality is the one of the aims that Boris Johnson has been engaged in perpetuating and perpetrating, encouraging, inciting. And that includes every aspect of his career or career's kind of journey. And this Afua Harsh is saying that Johnson looks like an out-of-date tribute act. And she's saying in the last paragraph, much of Britain's decline is structural, set in motion long before Johnson took office. And if you wanted to exacerbate it, you struggle to find a more effective path than the one we are currently on. So she's saying that Johnson is exacerbating the further decline of the country, the Britain. We have never in modern times endured anything quite as extreme as the toxic assault on America's political culture left behind by Donald Trump. As usual, ours is a poor imitation. And like all cheap fakes, it's not built to last. Now, that is a double kind of contradiction by Afwahar. Whoever gave her this idea of being sub clever there. And there is a cartoon by the Guardian cartoonist Steve Bell, which says that Boris Johnson is on the phone to Biden, and Biden says to Boris Johnson, "Who did you say I am?" And Boris Johnson says, "Congratulations on your second term, sir." Now that's the Steve Bell cartoon, which means that Boris Johnson doesn't recognize the result, doesn't recognize even the difference between the two individuals. And the reason is he is completely brainwashed or intentionally in denial. And there is a piece about how Western travel influencers got tangled up in Pakistan's politics. Travel bloggers have flocked to Pakistan in recent years, but have some of them become too close to the authorities. And it is a piece by Samira Shakil. And we shall not be reading that one because it is bound to contain too many inaccuracies and falsehoods. Now, back to the American piece by this woman who says that contesting racism is not un-American. And it's a piece featuring this person who is called Crenshaw. But the piece starts with October 1991, and Anita Hill was testifying against Clarence Thomas. Now, Clarence Thomas was, of course, the black nominee for Supreme Court, where she is still there now. I mean, he's there for nearly 30 years now. He has been there. And he's not kind of, if you like, proven the skeptics and his critics wrong, because he has sided with the right wing, which is what was the main objection. But the kind of trendies collected themselves together behind Anita Hill and Anita Hill's allegations against him that he sexually kind of abused her and propositioned her too nakedly. So the Guardian is today running this piece about the UK being the first European country to pass the milestone. It is not clear what the milestone has to do with this, because the milestone suggests something to be expected, desired, or even welcomed. The UK is first European country to pass 50,000 COVID-19 deaths. So that is the kind of thing that gives a completely false and misleading idea about what the pandemic is and how unfit the UK government is and and there is this clever, typically Guardian piece on the page 8, which is saying that Tory leaders warn of cuts to services if the council services. Now, this is corrupt because cuts and funding are the two interrelated kind of aspects of the same thing, which is the lobby by local councils to get as much external funding as possible. And their lobby is based on the claim that funding is directly related to the quality and the fact and the quality of service that they supposedly provide. There is an online piece about the two councils, Newham and Tower Hamlets, today, related to the issue of referendums about the elected mayor post or model of governance. There is no governance in Tower Hamlets or in Newham. There is mess in Tower Hamlets and there is mess in Newham. But the piece is significant in this context, talking about the government and talking about councils, because it is written by Dave Hill. Now, Dave Hill, for all of that time, the Luther Roman was in post, all that calendar kind of period, years, was the Guardian's kind of blogger on London. And Dave Hill, along with the rest of the Guardian, including Alan Rusbridger and his wife, Lindsay McKee, and one of the columnists called Fraser, this man from the St. Paul's Cathedral. All of them peddled the lies of Luther Roman and Luther Roman's regime. And he kind of reciprocated, or maybe he bribed them and they reciprocated by covering his kind of years in post as kind of harmless. Reading the contents of Dave Hill in those blogs and columns, reading those, as I repeat, it would be impossible to see or let alone anticipate what happened in the kind of petition that was successfully launched against the election of Luther Roman on the 22nd of May 2014. Because that petition ended with the election commissioner called Richard Morey, Mawrey, declaring Luther Roman and his election void. Luther Roman in post as void and no longer in post. And he declared that Luther Roman must leave that post immediately as of 23rd of April 2015, the day that Morey published his ruling. And Morey only disallowed or kind of discontinued the career as a councillor of only one other person, which is Alibor Chowdhury. But until that petition, nobody reading the kind of blog that Dave Hill published and the references he made to Tower Hamlets, references he made to the, in effect, the regime fronted by Luther Roman, nobody would imagine that Dave Hill was aware of what was going on, how many corrupt things were going on. And even if he were aware, it was quite clear from the fact that there was no mention of any of that in Dave Hill's blog, that he chose to deny knowing those things or having any care about those questions and information that he must have been received, must have been given, and he must have received. As part of my investigative evidence gathering work, I sat observing a number of the Luthuraman fronted kind of meetings of the cabinet, so-called. Not most of them, but I attended quite a few, just to observe what was going on in terms of the body language, in terms of the blankness and blandness of the meetings. And I noticed Dave Hill sitting to my right on the other side of the, let's say, tiny gallery in the room that is normally next to the council chamber, which is divided normally, but then the partition is removed during the so-called full council meetings, which I don't think will be held, in the council in the normal way, this 18th of November, 18th of this month. About that, Dave Hill says in his new independent column, On London, he runs a kind of blog or a website called On London. And in that piece, Dave Hill is in total denial of all the corruption, the criminality, the lies, the dishonesty, and the nepotism that took place during the 6 years of Luthuraman. So Dave Hill says, what does he say in the blog today? Let's see what he's saying. And he's got his On London is kind of, it has got the claim for the good city. And immediately underneath that is the kind of beaming, smirking picture, oversized picture of John Biggs. Now, looking at that picture, it would be impossible to call that as a diminutive man. The description that The Guardian published in April 2018 in a piece that was bylined to one of its current kind of writers who had been a Lambeth councillor. Now this beaming, grinning picture of John Biggs is not fit, it's not appropriate for this piece. And I'll say why. Because if there is any kind of movement among the people in a borough about the type of model or type of kind of structure the local council should have, then it should be, a piece should be featuring any evidence of gatherings, meetings of people or activists involved in that, not foisting an in-your-face sized picture of the most undesirable person in the borough, which is John Biggs, because he's a liar and he's a conspirator and he's a denier and he's a criminal, as I have been listing. And so Dave Hill not only doesn't recognize the people in the borough, not only does he not recognize the campaigners, he also doesn't recognize any of the now undisputed, uncontested wrongs that have been done by Tower Hamlets Council in the last 10 years, since October 2010, when the first foisting of the elected mayor was perpetrated. In the case of Newham, the first foisting was perpetrated in 2002, which is 18 years ago. And Dave Hill refers to Newham partially, and he refers to Croydon also misleadingly. He doesn't refer to Hackney or Lewisham. So he does refer to Tower Hamlets mainly, and then Newham, and then he refers to Croydon in a perverse way. Now, reading all of this, if a reader came from the outer space or came on the planet and landed in East London or in London from the Mars, and they wanted to know what was going on in terms of democracy, in terms of absence of democracy, in terms of the causes of poverty creation, in terms of the violations and breaches of rights of the ordinary people, and in terms of the kind of disproportionate and completely unwarranted and unjustified spying on political activists by the Metropolitan Police, which says on the record in the last kind of 5 years that the Metropolitan Police has been given publicity about funding crisis and shortage. It says that it doesn't have the necessary funding to do investigation on many of the crimes. And the lists of the crimes have been varying and varied. But the fact is that the police have been leading the propaganda to the effect that they are abolishing crimes. This is such a significant democratic deficit and kind of unconstitutional thing that in logic and in a sane kind of informed world or time, that would have been featuring in the debates by the MPs or campaigning minority of MPs. But there hasn't been. Take a pause there. Just think about this. This is the morning when the Guardian is running the piece about Tariq Ali having been spied on for 35 years. That's the Guardian piece. Tariq Ali has been spied on for 35 years. Now, and he says apparently he said to the kind of inquiry being conducted by a single judge called Meeting, probably on a video link yesterday, that at least 14 officers, that is the police persons, spied on Ali over 35 years. Now, if the police can have over 35 years 14 persons engaged in spying on a single person, this raises serious questions as to really police accountability and the purpose of policing and the powers that the police have. The same inquiry, of course, earlier this week was the forum where the parents of Stephen Lawrence, Neville and Doreen Lawrence, were represented by two, quote, QCs, that is licensed law traders. And both of them said identical things about the behavior of the London Metropolitan Police. Now, that was about the lack of transparency, lack of accountability, lack of compliance with the legal duties to share the information with the parents and the family. But essentially, the real crisis that has been caused to the family, to the parents of Stephen Lawrence, in addition to the grief linked with his murder, is the fact that they have not been treated at all fairly. And they have not been given the information, to access to information that they have been entitled to for the last 27 years. So what we are looking at in the Dave Hill blog is the kind of denial that actually features and constitutes the journalism of Fleet Street. And the journalism of The Guardian is absolutely, completely corrupt. As Dave Hill showed during the 10 years of the kind of, not 10 years, but during the calendar years that he was editing and compiling the Guardian's blog on London. And then he has been showing in this thing on London, which he has flaunted now since he left the Guardian, whatever the reason was. Whatever the reason, whatever the reason, whether he was kind of considered inappropriate or kind of not rigorous enough, or he was, for other reasons, considered to be, in terms of disposable, is secondary. The main thing is that whoever is in control of making the decisions at the Guardian is not making the decisions that they should be making by including, not only giving priority, but including as the main contribution people, campaigners who are campaigning for democracy at every level. And this piece about the Tariq Ali being spied on gives a false impression about the Guardian. It suggests that the Guardian is concerned about these things and spying and whatever. It is not. Because every day across England, let's say about England, because the UK is being broken by Johnson and the others. So they don't actually kind of have much respect and recognition for the activists and campaigners in Scotland. They don't have in London, that is, except when it comes to denouncing the people who want more say for Scotland, and the Scottish people. And they have even less respect for the Welsh, because the Welsh is treated even more contemptuously than the English-centric, Westminster-based kind of power holders treat the Scots. And Ireland is more complicated, but essentially Ireland is treated as a colony, the remaining part, the Northern Ireland. And the colonial mentality, the racist mentality, is what the kind of Guardian colludes with, despite the fact that in this piece about this American anti-racist woman, they are saying that contesting racism in America is not un-American. I mean, that is an apologetic kind of line. And that is the line that is consistent with the Guardian. Because the Guardian thinks that racism is the norm and should be the norm. And anyone who challenges factually, evidentially, racist behavior is being abnormal. And in that, the Guardian is, of course, taking the side and behaving like the Metropolitan Police at all these levels that the Guardian is now kind of reporting about in the context of the meetings inquiry that is underway now and has been public only for the last 2 days, I think. And in the kind of coverage by the so-called critic of Fleet Street, Private Eye calls Fleet Street street of shame. We have discussed that before. But essentially what the Private Eye kind of phrase is based on is the assumption that Fleet Street is populated by journalists or journos who are dishonest, corrupt, and most of the times they are kind of wrong and they are drunk as well. This goes back to the years before Ian Pissoff took over. It was the era of the Richard Ingrams and Paul Foot and the others who were among the founders. And Richard Ingrams, of course, was the only other editor really long term before he gave the chair to the Pissoff. So the narrative in the Private Eye about the local councils may appear to be kind of original, rigorous, and decisive, and making kind of difference for democracy and accountability, for the fact that it is titled Rotten Boroughs. But that's misleading. That's deceptive, because the Rotten Boroughs in the Private Eye does not contain really investigative, original, devastating pieces of reporting that unsettles any of the regimes in the councils that they cover. And the other thing is that hardly, not that it does never happen, but hardly any prosecution has taken place of corrupt councillors or corrupt council employees or corrupt crooks in the council, kind of in fixer positions installed by crooked council regimes under various excuses being prosecuted. So what we are saying in this world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, once again, is a number of original things, exclusively only to be found on this program, not anywhere else, not in the so-called mainstream media or any of the blogs. No matter who is doing the blogs, there will not be, because there has not been and there cannot be, for the simple reason that all these people doing the so-called trendy blogs, giving them kind of trendy names or titles, are at the end of the day kind of serving their purpose to enhance their careers and gain something materially. Unlike all of them, this program and this campaign is not about material gains. Not for a million years. We are actually against connecting material gains with this campaign or any campaign that we have been doing. It is universal values and ethics and morality, and the say which is beyond price and priceless and is priceless. That's what we do, because we solely and utterly found our kind of utterances and our commentary on evidence that we rigorously check and double check and multi-check. So you cannot find a similar outlet anywhere, not just in the UK, but anywhere else. If there is one, we would be the first to want to know what that is. As, for example, in the case of the very kind of inaccessible kind of slot that run or has run sometimes on the Pakistan channel called Khabarnak, we tried to get information about their kind of attitude to the general media or society. We haven't got any response yet, but we don't think that they are doing that kind of thing at all, although it is presented, or the episodes that we have seen, some of the episodes we have seen are kind of presented as kind of hilarious, as kind of humorous and satirical, with content, satirical content or sub-satirical content, satire and humor. But I don't think they would be doing any political kind of critiques, unlike this program. We are solely and absolutely fully dedicated to doing critiques based on the evidence and critiques of the political system and the analysis of the corrupt system and the corruptors in, of, and via the system or lack of system. And we also include the corrupt judiciary and the corrupt rest of the state in this country. And by extension, we also, of course, include the behavior of their counterparts in other countries, especially across the Atlantic in the USA, because of the connections with empire and colonialism that exists between the UK and the USA and in Canada. Even before the Brexit kind of lunacy hit the public platform in this country, the relationship between the, or if you like, correspondence between the UK and the European or Western European countries, which is what the main EU membership countries are. The relationship and the exchanges and the communications have been very, very rare. So when we talk about politics and political system and the political corruption and the references to the legal so-called system, because of the evidence that there is no connection or there is no kind of evidence of connection, we have to rely on referring to things in the USA with which the UK has got multi-layered, multifaceted connections, despite the fact that there are, in many cases, connections that are not ethically sound, morally sound, or democratically sound. And what we are looking at in the kind of papers today, the papers today are full of kind of typical, kind of ignorant, racist kind of promotions. And the racist Daily Express has got yet another bogus kind of plug for Priti Patel, who is the Interior Minister. And it is against the migrants. It's a very desperate kind of situation where Priti Patel is forced to seek validity and legitimacy as a minister by being more extremely hostile and hateful and in denial of the rights of the most poorest of the people. That is what, and this is the thing that the Express, racist Express, is celebrating. Free movement, end of free movement. And this is grotesque because this is in breach. This is in breach of the UK's obligations under the various treaties, the United Nations and international treaties. And this is illegal. This is contrary to the international law and international legal obligations of the UK. And there is no mention in the Express of the international law or laws being broken by the and breached by Priti Patel or the Johnson regime. And the Daily Mail has got apparently exclusive piece about Boris Johnson's girlfriend having a bus stop with an employee at Downing Street who has left as a result of the bus stop. And it says that this particular employee loses war with Johnson's fiancée. Will Cummings now follow him out of the door? And the Mail is saying that the departure of this particular employee was made possible by the crew that played Bruiser, the Boris Bruiser played a game of chicken with him. Now it's a piece by Andrew Pierce, one of the most poisonous and shameless kind of commentator on the right. Andrew Pierce is the one that actually featured on many of the BBC's Dateline London slot during Bill Ayer's war on Iraq. And Andrew Pierce was totally in denial of the human rights of the people being victimized and murdered and massacred by Blair and Bush. So that's the background to the person that is writing this thing about Kerry Simon ousting this Lee Kane, Director of Communications, who sensationally quit after rashly deciding to take on a formidable quartet of Westminster's most powerful women, while he was reportedly immediately replaced by the Prime Minister's official spokesman James Slack. The aftershocks of his departure will continue to reverberate for some time to come. The Oldham-born, Oxford-educated academic is a popular figure around number 10. And this is the reference to the extremely mentally kind of brainwashed Pakistan origin person called Munira Mirza. And so the Andrew Pierce would be peddling these right-wingers. And he's promoting and he's celebrating the eugenicist Allegra Stratton and Munira Mirza, who apparently, according to Pierce, joined the fight to block Lee Kane. And so on. So the Daily Mail is not talking about real substance. It's peddling the right-wingers, fighting one another, or fighting one group of right-wingers fighting another group of right-wingers and racists in Downing Street. Now, the fact that it's a Pakistani-linked or Pakistani backgrounded woman born in Oldham, Munira Mirza, does not in any way mean that she is against racists, let alone she is against the anti-Muslim character and characteristics and the career and the strategy of Boris Johnson. In fact, it is quite possible that before Johnson started to imitate Donald Trump and up his attacks on Muslims, he must have had one or more than one conversation with Munira Mirza. And there are pieces about the kind of lockdown and the restrictions on relations, seeing their loved ones when they're very ill. And there is a coronavirus crisis on pages 10 and 11, where it says, how many police, that is British police, does it take to shut a COVID-busting gym, that is a gymnasium? The answer, at least 30. So they're running this one, line of police outside the gym. So this is a question that is connected with the line, the narrative, the propaganda line on behalf of the police and by the police, that they are abolishing crimes, which is unconstitutional completely. They're abolishing crimes, in effect, because of lack of funding. Now, if that is the case, then how can 14 police be employed over 35 years in spying on one single person, a campaigner? What is the justification? How do they justify that kind of expenditure of resources? And how is it that 30 police persons are kind of called or employed or deployed to stop a gym kind of breaching the lockdown? And they've got a follow-up piece in the Daily Mail, which has been running the Charles Spencer, that is Diana's brother, kind of reigniting demand for the BBC to investigate how Martin Bashir cheated him as the way to get access to his sister, Diana, before Diana agreed to be interviewed by Bashir in 1995. So they're saying that Bashir cashed in on interviewed Diana with a £200,000 a year television firm called Panoramic. Now, it's not just Diana that he cheated. It's not just Charles Spencer that he lied to. Martin Bashir lied to and lied about Michael Jackson as well in the USA, as the widely documented kind of items of correspondence and exchange and dispute between them kind of shows. And here is a kind of satire piece by Craig Brown, who is saying to Donald Trump, "You are a loser, Donald, and you are fired." And the picture illustrating that is that of Alan Sugar. Now, Alan Sugar is a racist, notorious racist, and an abuser of the BBC license fee money and all the other things. And he has been supportive of the right-wing racist kind of regimes of the Tories. And this is not the correct person to be used to illustrate an anti-Donald Trump kind of comic piece or satire piece. And here is a piece which is again about the councils. Now, the Labour Council, one Labour Council, that is the kind of part of the agenda of the Daily Mail, that it would, if there is any dysfunctioning council that is Labour controlled, then it would feature it. If it was a Tory one, it would not. The Croydon Council, this is the Croydon Council that we talked about earlier, about the fact that Dave Hill, in his On London blog Business, has referred to Croydon and promoted Croydon's call for referendum in a most ill-informed, ignorant, and misleading way. So let's go into the details of this piece by the Daily Mail, which is saying Croydon Council declared itself practically bankrupt yesterday. The Labour-run South London Borough imposed an emergency spending restrictions under Section 114 notice. Only the second local council in 2 decades to face such measures. Local officials blamed the coronavirus crisis coupled with a decade of austerity, but the government last night accused the council of being dysfunctional. Now, before going into the rest of the piece, it is quite possible that this dysfunctional state, as claimed by the Conservative minister, will be used as a pretext to support the movement to push Croydon into a directly elected mayor mode. Now, if that happens, it is quite likely the way they are pushing it. If that happens, then Croydon would become even worse. And my prediction is that the elected mayor system is a corrupt system on top of the pre-existing corruption in the councils, on top of the pre-existing culture of non-accountability or impunity from accountability. And this is partisan, this is motivated by party political kind of motives. But essentially, there is a basic evidential narrative also running through the piece. It's generic. It's generic, the housing minister, who reported as saying last night that a new public interest report is damning about the dysfunctional governance within Croydon Council, who have been entirely responsible with their spending and investments. Generic added there are serious questions that local leaders have to answer, and we are stepping in to get the situation under control. Generic said the council had been allocated more than £23 million in funding since the start of the pandemic. The Local Government Association, which represents councils, last night urged the government to help authorities, that is councils, face spiraling demand on day-to-day services caused by COVID-19. Now, this we shall examine and have to examine extensively as to what do the local councils actually provide and what services do they deliver normally, and what are they doing during this COVID crisis. And the Daily Mail, which is a conservative supporting platform, saying that Croydon's conservative opposition leader, Jason Perry, said the Labour councillors have preferred to play monopoly and borrow billions to buy hotels and shopping centres. Now that is very interesting, even if it comes from a conservative. What business is it of local councils? And Croydon is a small local council because it is not like what used to be the GLC, the Greater London Council, or County Council. It's a local borough council. If it is true that it has been borrowing billions, then it is completely unacceptable. And it proves our analysis, which is that all the councils are corrupt, mainly because there is no democracy. And in the case of Croydon, which the Daily Mail is not saying, they're going to even sink whatever remnants of democracy there is. Because if the Tories, the opposition, are running the campaign to impose an elected mayor on Croydon, absolutely suicidal, politically, economically, socially, and of course, democratically. And the Croydon Conservatives, Jason Perry added, they have doubled their debt in 6 years to 1.5 billion. That's 15,000 per hour they have borrowed since taking office in 2014. 2014, the year that Lutfur Rahman Tower Hamders was found to have won the mayoral election the second time by using corrupt means. In August 2020, the council's former chief executive, Jo Negrini, left her £220,000 a year post after 4 years in the role. Critics blamed her for lavish investments, which forced the council to axe 400 jobs and slash its budget by 15% to stay afloat. The council's failure is expected to be a major embarrassment for London's Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan, whose spokesman last night also blamed the pandemic in part for Croydon Council's problems. Now, the fact that this woman was paid £222,000 a year and that she indulged in luxury investments and had 400 people lose their jobs is not an accident. It is integrally linked to it, undeniably linked with the lack of democracy and lack of accountability, which is why we said that Corbyn was guilty of colluding with crooks and corruption, because Corbyn in his 5 years never once referred to the need for councils or councillors to be accountable, to be held to account. And the fact that it was Corbyn and not Starmer doesn't make any difference, because as a party, the Labour Party is not for democracy. When it comes to wielding powers imposed, the Labour Party is not democratic, not accountable, not transparent. So Tariq Ali being under police spying for 35 years includes several Labour government. Think about that. So they were doing the same thing as the Conservative central government and the Conservative regime in London Metropolitan Police were doing about spying on Tariq Ali. What's the difference? And the fact that Tariq Ali is the one who spoke and not Corbyn shows that Corbyn is out of touch. And he is the garden gnome that I have called him, which is why he lost on all key counts. And the newspapers, essentially the Guardian is not talking about Croydon and will not talk about Croydon. So we shall be continuing. This is 9 o'clock GMT on Thursday, the 12th of November 2020. We shall be continuing in the next part.